The blizzard came out of nowhere on that February afternoon in 1882, turning the New Mexico sky from clear blue to a swirling mass of white fury that seemed impossible this far south. And Marianne Garrison knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die alone on this God-forsaken road 3 miles outside Las Lunas. She had been foolish to leave town when the temperature started dropping, but the telegram from Santa Fe about her father's failing health had sent her into a panic. And now her horse had thrown a shoe and was limping badly while the wind howled like a demon and her fingers had gone numb inside her gloves. The snow was already ankle-deep and rising fast, an aberration of nature that happened maybe once every 20 years in this high desert country, and she could barely see 10 feet ahead through the whiteout conditions. Her horse whinnied in distress, and Marianne felt tears freeze on her cheeks as she tried to pull the animal forward, but the mare simply would not move anymore. The wind cut through her wool coat like it was made of paper, and she knew hypothermia would claim her within hours if she did not find shelter. She had passed the last ranch house over an hour ago, and there was nothing but empty scrubland between here and the town she had been heading toward. Then through the screaming wind, she heard something that made her heart leap, the sound of hoofbeats, steady and sure. A rider emerged from the white curtain of snow, sitting tall on a massive roan gelding that seemed unbothered by the storm. The man wore a heavy sheepskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, and even through the blizzard, Marianne could see the concern etched on his weathered face as he drew closer. "Madam, you cannot be out here," he shouted over the wind, his voice deep and authoritative. "This storm is only getting worse." "My horse," Marianne called back, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form words. "She threw a shoe. I cannot get her to move." The cowboy dismounted in one fluid motion, and Marianne noticed he moved with the confidence of someone who had spent his entire life in the saddle. He was tall, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair visible beneath his hat and striking blue eyes that assessed the situation with quick intelligence. He examined her horse's hoof with gentle hands despite the urgency of their circumstances. "She needs rest and proper shoeing, but first we need to get both of you out of this weather," he said firmly. "There's an old line shack about half a mile west. It is not much, but it will keep us from freezing to death." "I need to get to Santa Fe," Marianne protested weakly, though even she knew how absurd that sounded given their circumstances. "Madam, you will be dead within the hour if you stay out here, and Santa Fe might as well be on the moon right now," the cowboy said bluntly, though his tone was not unkind. "I am taking you to shelter, and we can argue about it once we are somewhere warm. Can you ride?" Marianne nodded, though she was not entirely certain. The cold had sapped her strength, and her legs felt like lead. The cowboy seemed to sense this because he stepped closer, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he gripped her waist. "I am going to put you on my horse," he said. "We will pony your mare behind us. She can make it that far even with a bad hoof." Before Marianne could respond, he lifted her as though she weighed nothing and settled her onto his saddle. He swung up behind her, his body providing an immediate windbreak that made her gasp with relief. His arm came around her waist, holding her secure, and she could feel the solid warmth of him even through their layers of clothing. "Hold on tight," he instructed, gathering the reins of her mare with his free hand. "It is going to be rough going." They pushed forward into the blinding snow, and Marianne had never been more grateful for another human being's presence in her entire life. The cowboy guided his horse with absolute certainty, as though he could see through the whiteout by sheer force of will. She leaned back against his chest, borrowing his warmth, too cold and frightened to worry about propriety. True to his word, They reached the line shack within 20 minutes, though it felt like an eternity. The small structure was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it was solid and it blocked the wind. The cowboy dismounted and lifted Marianne down, his hands steadying her when her legs nearly buckled. "Get inside," he ordered. "There should be wood by the stove. Try to get a fire started while I tend the horses." Marianne stumbled through the door, her hands shaking so badly she could hardly strike a match. The tiny cabin contained a potbelly stove, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and a single narrow cot covered with a moth-eaten blanket. There was indeed a small stack of firewood and kindling, left by whatever cowboy had last used this place as temporary shelter. On her 3rd attempt, she managed to get a flame to catch, and by the time the cowboy came back inside leading their saddlebags, a small fire was crackling in the stove. He closed the door firmly against the howling wind and removed his hat, shaking snow from it. "Good work," he said approvingly. "Your horse is in the lean-to with mine. They will be fine until this blows over." Now that they were in relative safety and better light, Marianne could see him more clearly. He had a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, a straight nose that looked like it had been broken at least once, and those remarkable blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. He was handsome in a rugged, weathered way that spoke of years spent outdoors doing hard physical labor. "Thank you," Marianne managed, her voice still trembling. "You saved my life. I am Marianne Garrison." "Caleb Thorne," he replied, moving to the stove to add more wood. "And I only did what anyone would do. You were in trouble." "Most men would have ridden past in weather like this," Marianne said honestly. "They would have been trying to save themselves." Caleb's eyes met hers, and something flickered in their depths that she could not quite read. "Then I suppose I am not most men," he said simply. "Now we need to get you properly warm. That coat is soaked through." He was right. Marianne's coat was heavy with melted snow and her dress beneath was damp. She was still shivering despite the growing warmth from the stove. Caleb rummaged through his saddlebag and produced a heavy wool shirt. "It will be too big, but it is dry," he said, turning his back to give her privacy. "Get out of those wet things before you catch your death." Marianne hesitated only a moment before her practical nature won out over her modesty. She peeled off her coat and the outer layer of her dress, spreading them near the stove to dry. She kept her chemise and petticoat on for decency's sake and pulled Caleb's shirt over her head. It hung nearly to her knees and smelled of leather and wood smoke and something else that was distinctly masculine. She found it oddly comforting. "You can turn around," she said softly. When Caleb turned back, something changed in his expression, though he schooled it quickly. Marianne knew she must look ridiculous in his oversized shirt with her dark hair coming loose from its pins, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made her breath catch. "Better," he said gruffly, moving to his saddlebag again. "I have some jerky and hardtack if you are hungry. Not exactly a feast, but it will keep our strength up." They sat at the small table, and Marianne realized she was ravenous despite everything. As they ate, the storm continued to rage outside, the wind rattling the shutters and making the walls creak. The temperature inside the cabin was slowly rising, though it was still far from warm. "What were you doing out on that road alone?" Caleb asked, his tone more curious than accusatory. "Las Lunas is not exactly on the way to anywhere, and this weather came up fast, but there were signs if you knew what to look for." Marianne explained about the telegram and her father's illness, how she had been staying with her aunt in Las Lunas while working as a schoolteacher, and how the message had sent her rushing toward Santa Fe without proper planning. As she spoke, she found herself watching Caleb's face, noting the way he listened with complete attention, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "Your father means a great deal to you," Caleb observed when she finished. "He is all I have left," Marianne admitted. "My mother died when I was 12, and my younger brother was killed in a mining accident 3 years ago. If something happens to my father before I can reach him—" She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Caleb reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His palm was warm and calloused, strong and steady. "We will get you to Santa Fe as soon as this storm breaks," he promised. "I give you my word." "Why?" Marianne asked suddenly. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me at all." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his thumb absently stroking the back of her hand in a way that sent unexpected warmth through her entire body. "Maybe I needed to find someone worth being kind to," he said finally, his voice low. "This country can make a man hard if he is not careful. It can make him forget there is anything worth protecting besides his own hide." There was something in his words that suggested a deeper story, and Marianne found herself wanting to know everything about this mysterious cowboy who had appeared out of a blizzard like some kind of guardian angel. "Where are you from?" she asked. "Originally." "Missouri," Caleb said, releasing her hand and leaning back in his chair. "Came west after the war when there was nothing left back home worth staying for. Spent time in Colorado, Wyoming, worked ranches and trail drives. Ended up in New Mexico about 5 years ago and hired on with the Double T Ranch just north of Las Lunas." "You like it here?" Marianne asked. "It is hard country," Caleb said thoughtfully. "Unforgiving, but it is honest in its hardness, if that makes sense. You know what you are up against. It does not pretend to be something it is not." He paused, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. "Not many school teachers end up in places like Las Lunas. What brought you out here?" Marianne felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Necessity more than choice," she admitted. "Teaching positions in the cities are scarce and they prefer to hire men. My aunt wrote that the school in Las Lunas needed a teacher, and I needed employment. It has been an adjustment." "I imagine it has," Caleb said with the hint of a smile. "Going from city life to a town of maybe 300 people, most of whom are more concerned with cattle and crops than books and learning." "The children are bright," Marianne said defensively. "They deserve an education just as much as children anywhere else." "I did not mean to insult them or you," Caleb said quickly. "I just meant it must be lonely sometimes, being so far from what you knew." He had struck closer to the truth than Marianne wanted to admit. She had been desperately lonely in Las Lunas, living with her well-meaning but overbearing aunt, teaching children who sometimes looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language, surrounded by a landscape that still felt alien and hostile despite its stark beauty. "Yes," she said simply. "It is lonely." The wind howled louder and snow rattled against the windows. The fire in the stove crackled and popped. In the growing warmth of the small cabin, Marianne felt something shift between them, an awareness that had nothing to do with their dangerous circumstances, and everything to do with the way Caleb was looking at her. "You should try to get some rest," Caleb said, breaking the moment. "This storm is not going to blow over for hours yet, maybe not until tomorrow. You need to keep your strength up." "What about you?" Marianne asked. "I will keep the fire going and make sure the roof does not cave in from the snow," Caleb said. "I have spent plenty of nights without sleep." "One more will not kill me." Marianne wanted to argue, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a heavy weight. The cold and fear had drained her reserves, and now that she was warming up, her body was demanding rest. She moved to the narrow cot and lay down, pulling the thin blanket over herself. It was not nearly warm enough. After a few minutes of listening to her teeth chatter, Caleb muttered something under his breath and moved to his saddlebag, pulling out another blanket. He brought it to her and spread it over the first one. "Better?" he asked. Yes, thank you, Marianne whispered, looking up at him. In the firelight, his features seemed softer, less hard-edged. She had the sudden absurd urge to reach up and touch his face, to trace the line of his jaw with her fingers. Caleb seemed to read something in her expression because his eyes darkened, and he took a deliberate step back. "Sleep, Miss Garrison," he said quietly. "You are safe here." And somehow, impossibly, she believed him. Despite being alone with a strange man in the middle of a blizzard miles from anywhere, Marianne felt safer than she had in months. She closed her eyes and let sleep claim her. She woke once in the night to find Caleb sitting in one of the chairs he had pulled close to the stove. His arms crossed over his chest, his head tilted back against the wall. He was not quite asleep, more dozing than anything, and his hand rested on the pistol at his hip in a way that suggested long habit. Watching over her even in his exhaustion, something in Marianne's chest tightened painfully at the sight. When had anyone last cared enough to lose sleep watching over her? When had she last mattered enough to someone that they would put themselves out on her behalf? She must have made a sound because Caleb's eyes opened immediately, alert despite his fatigue. "You all right?" he asked softly. "Yes," Marianne whispered. "Just needed a moment, go back to sleep." "I am fine," Caleb assured her, though the shadows under his eyes suggested otherwise. "Storm is still going strong. We will be here at least until morning." "Caleb," Marianne said impulsively, "thank you, truly." "I know I already said it, but I mean it. You could have left me out there." "No," Caleb said firmly, his blue eyes finding hers in the dim firelight. "I could not have. It was never even a possibility." Something in the way he said it made Marianne's heart flutter strangely. She pulled the blankets tighter around herself and tried to convince herself that her reaction was just gratitude, just relief at being rescued. Nothing more. But as she drifted back to sleep, she knew she was lying to herself. When Marianne woke again, gray dawn light was seeping through the gaps in the shutters, and the howling wind had diminished to a low moan. The air in the cabin was cold enough to see her breath, and she realized the fire had burned low. She sat up quickly, wrapping one of the blankets around her shoulders, and saw Caleb standing at the window, peering out through a crack. "Has it stopped?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. Caleb turned, and something in his expression softened when he saw her sitting there wrapped in blankets with her hair in wild disarray around her shoulders. "Mostly," he said. "Still some snow falling, but the wind has died down. I have been out to check the horses. They are fine, but there is at least 2 feet of snow out there." "Can we travel in it?" Marianne asked anxiously, thinking of her father. "Not easily, and not your horse with that bad shoe," Caleb said apologetically. "But Las Lunas is only a few miles from here. I can ride back, get help, and have someone come out with a wagon. We can get you back to town by this afternoon if the weather holds." The practical part of Marianne knew this made sense, but another part of her, a part she did not fully understand, did not want him to leave. The thought of sitting alone in this cabin waiting for his return filled her with an anxiety that had nothing to do with cold or fear for her safety. "You will come back?" she asked before she could stop herself. Caleb crossed the small space between them in 2 strides and knelt beside the cot, bringing himself to her eye level. "I will come back," he promised, his voice intense. "Marianne, I will always come back. I give you my word." The use of her first name sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. They were so close she could see the individual stubble on his jaw, the ring of darker blue around his irises, the small scar cutting through his left eyebrow. Without thinking, she reached out and touched that scar gently with one finger. "How did you get this?" she whispered. Caleb's hand came up to catch hers, his fingers wrapping around her wrist with surprising gentleness. Bar fight in Dodge City about 6 years ago, he said, a wry smile touching his lips. I was younger and dumber and thought I needed to defend some woman's honor. Turned out she did not particularly want her honor defended, and her actual boyfriend took exception to my interference. Did you win? Marianne asked, surprised to find herself smiling. Define winning, Caleb said. I did not get killed, which I count as a victory, but I learned an important lesson about minding my own business. Yet here you are, Marianne pointed out, rescuing strange women from blizzards. That is different, Caleb said seriously, his thumb stroking the sensitive inside of her wrist in a way that made her pulse jump. You needed help. You were not looking for trouble. You were just trying to get to your father. Still, Marianne said softly, you made me your problem. Most men would not have. Something fierce flashed in Caleb's eyes and his grip on her wrist tightened just slightly. You are not a problem, he said intently. Do not ever think that. What I did last night, what I am going to do today, none of it is a burden to me. Do you understand? Marianne's breath caught at the intensity in his voice, the way he was looking at her like she was something precious and worth protecting. I do not understand, she admitted shakily. You do not even know me. Maybe not yet, Caleb said, but I want to. From the moment I saw you standing in that blizzard refusing to abandon your horse even though it was going to get you killed, I wanted to know you. You have courage, Marianne. Real courage, not the kind that comes from being too stupid to know when you are in danger. You knew exactly how much trouble you were in, and you were terrified, but you were still trying to take care of your horse. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are. I was foolish to be out there in the first place, Marianne protested weakly. You were desperate, Caleb corrected. There is a difference. You were willing to risk everything to get to someone you love. How is that foolish? Tears pricked at Marianne's eyes and she blinked them back furiously. She was not a woman who cried easily, but something about this man's unexpected understanding, his refusal to judge her for her panic and poor planning, broke through her careful composure. I need to get to Santa Fe, she said, her voice cracking. My father needs me. And you will get there, Caleb assured her. But first, let me get you back to Las Lunas safely. Then I will personally escort you to Santa Fe, make sure you get to your father. I promise you, Marianne, you are not alone in this anymore. Why? Marianne asked again, the question almost a plea. Why are you doing this for me? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face like he was memorizing every detail. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because the moment I pulled you onto my horse and you leaned against me trusting me to keep you safe, something changed. I cannot explain it. I have never felt anything like it before. But you are not a burden to me, Marianne. You are something else entirely. Something I did not know I was looking for until I found it. Before Marianne could process what he was saying, before she could formulate any kind of response, Caleb released her wrist and stood abruptly. I need to ride out before more weather moves in, he said, his tone shifting back to practical efficiency. There is enough wood to keep the fire going for several hours. Do not let it go out. I will be back as quickly as I can. He moved around the cabin with quick efficiency, gathering his things, checking his weapons. At the door, he paused and looked back at her. Bar the door behind me, he instructed. Do not open it for anyone but me. I will knock 3 times, pause, then twice more. That way you will know it is me. You think there is danger? Marianne asked, feeling a spike of fear. I think a woman alone is always potentially in danger, Caleb said bluntly. And I think I would never forgive myself if something happened to you while I was gone, so humor me and bar the door. After he left, Marianne did as he asked, sliding the heavy wooden bar into place. She heard his horse's hoofbeats fade into the muffled silence that deep snow always brings, and then she was truly alone. She spent the time getting fully dressed in her now dry clothes, though she kept Caleb's shirt close, finding comfort in its lingering scent. She fed the fire, melted snow for water, and tried not to think too hard about everything Caleb had said to her. It was too much, too fast, too intense. They had known each other less than 24 hours. These kinds of feelings could not possibly be real. And yet, when she heard the distinctive pattern of knocks several hours later, her heart leaped in her chest with a joy that felt entirely too real and too powerful to deny. She opened the door to find Caleb standing there with his horse, and a wagon driven by a weathered older man with kind eyes and a tobacco-stained beard. "Miss Garrison," Caleb said formally, though his eyes were warm as they met hers. "This is Frank Mitchell from the livery in Las Lunas. He has agreed to take you back to town." "Much obliged, madam," Frank said, tipping his hat. "Gave me quite a start when young Caleb here came riding in this morning talking about a lady stuck out at the old line shack. That was some storm last night, worst I have seen in near 30 years. They loaded Marianne's limping horse into the wagon bed and helped her up onto the bench seat. Caleb swung onto his own horse, clearly intending to ride alongside them. The journey back to Las Lunas was slow and difficult, the wagon struggling through drifts that came up to the wheel hubs in places, but they made steady progress. When they finally rolled into town, Marianne saw people out everywhere, digging out from the storm, assessing damage, helping neighbors. The sight of the wagon with Marianne in it drew curious stares and whispers. In a town this small, she knew, her overnight absence with Caleb Thorne would be noted and discussed. Frank drove the wagon directly to the small house where Marianne lived with her aunt, and before they had even fully stopped, the front door flew open and Aunt Clara came rushing out, her face a mixture of relief and fury. "Marianne Elizabeth Garrison," she cried. "Where have you been?" "I have been out of my mind with worry. I am sorry, Aunt Clara," Marianne said as Caleb helped her down from the wagon. "I got caught in the storm on the road to Santa Fe. Mr. Thorne here saved my life." Aunt Clara's sharp eyes took in Caleb's hand still on Marianne's elbow, the protective way he was standing close to her, and something calculating entered her expression. "Indeed," she said coolly. "Well, Mr. Thorne, the family is grateful for your assistance. I am sure you have other business to attend to." It was a clear dismissal, but Caleb did not move. "Miss Garrison received a telegram yesterday about her father's illness," he said evenly. "She needs to get to Santa Fe. I intend to escort her." "That will not be necessary," Aunt Clara said firmly. "We will make our own arrangements." "Actually," Marianne said, surprising herself with the firmness in her own voice, "I would very much appreciate Mr. Thorne's escort. The roads are dangerous, especially after the storm, and he has already proven himself capable and trustworthy." Aunt Clara's lips pressed into a thin line, but she seemed to recognize that this was not an argument she could win, at least not in public. "Very well," she said stiffly. "Come inside, Marianne. You must be frozen through." Caleb caught Marianne's hand briefly as she turned to follow her aunt. "I will come by tomorrow morning," he said quietly. "We will leave for Santa Fe at first light." "Thank you," Marianne whispered, squeezing his hand. Inside the house, Aunt Clara wasted no time in voicing her disapproval. "Do you have any idea how this looks?" she demanded as soon as the door closed. "Spending the night alone with a man, a cowboy no less, in some shack miles from town. Your reputation will be in tatters." "My reputation is less important than my life," Marianne said wearily, sinking into a chair by the fire. "I would be dead if not for Caleb, dead and frozen in a snowdrift somewhere." "Caleb, is it?" Aunt Clara said sharply. "You are on first-name terms already," "Aunt Clara, please," Marianne said, pressing her fingers to her temples where a headache was beginning to throb. "I am exhausted and worried about Father, and I simply do not have the energy for this conversation right now." Her aunt's expression softened slightly. "I am sorry, dear. Of course you are worried. I received another telegram this morning. Your father's condition has stabilized. He is not out of danger yet, but the doctor says if he makes it through the next few days, his chances of recovery are good." Relief flooded through Marianne so intensely she felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank God," she whispered. "I still need to go to him, but at least—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "Of course you need to go to him," Aunt Clara agreed. "And if you must have this Caleb Thorne as an escort, then I suppose there is no help for it. But Marianne, you must be careful. A man like that, a drifter with no roots and no prospects, he is not the kind of man a respectable woman should associate with beyond simple necessity." Marianne thought about the way Caleb had held her on his horse, his body shielding her from the wind. The way he had given her his shirt and his blankets. The way he had looked at her in the firelight and told her she was not a burden. The intensity in his voice when he promised to come back. "I think," she said carefully, "that you do not know what kind of man he is at all." That night, Marianne lay in her own bed in her aunt's house, warm and safe and comfortable, and found herself missing the cramped discomfort of the lined shack, the sound of the wind and the crackling fire, and most of all, the steady presence of Caleb Thorne watching over her. True to his word, Caleb arrived just after dawn the next morning, riding his big roan and leading a sturdy bay mare for Marianne. He had clearly been up early preparing for their journey. His saddlebags were packed with supplies, and he carried a rifle in a scabbard on his saddle. "The roads should be passable," he told Marianne as he helped her mount the bay. "The main route to Santa Fe sees enough traffic that it will be broken down by now. We should make it by tomorrow evening if we push hard." "Thank you for this," Marianne said sincerely, "for everything." "You do not need to keep thanking me," Caleb said, swinging onto his own horse. "I told you this is not a burden." They rode out of Las Lunas with half the town watching, and Marianne knew the gossip would be flying before they were even out of sight. But she found she did not care as much as she should have. Her reputation had never done much for her anyway. It had not gotten her better job prospects or made her less lonely. Maybe it was time to stop worrying so much about what other people thought. The landscape was transformed by the snow, the normally brown and tan desert now blanketed in white that sparkled in the morning sun. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, and Marianne found herself understanding a little better why Caleb had described New Mexico as honest in its hardness. They rode in companionable silence for the first hour, and then Caleb began to talk, telling her about the ranch where he worked, about the cattle drives he had been on, about the vast empty spaces of the West, and the way they could make a man feel both insignificant and vitally important at the same time. Marianne found herself fascinated by the life he described, so different from anything she had ever known. In turn, she told him about growing up in Kansas City, about her love of books and learning, about the devastation of losing first her mother and then her brother, and finally about coming west because there was nothing left for her in the life she had known. "It sounds like we are both running from something," Caleb observed as they stopped to rest the horses near midday. "Maybe," Marianne agreed, accepting the canteen he offered her. "Or maybe we are running towards something and just have not figured out what it is yet." Caleb looked at her for a long moment, something intense and unreadable in his blue eyes. "Maybe," he said softly. They made camp that night in a sheltered spot off the main road, and Caleb built a fire while Marianne unpacked the food he had brought. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, they sat close to the flames, passing a tin cup of coffee back and forth between them. "Tell me about your father," Caleb said. "What is he like?" Marianne smiled, staring into the fire. "He is stubborn and opinionated and terrible at taking care of himself," she said fondly. "He is also brilliant and kind and the best man I know. He was a lawyer before his health started failing. He fought for people who could not afford to pay him, who needed someone to stand up for them against powerful interests. It made him a lot of enemies, but he never cared. He always said that a man's character is defined by whether he does the right thing even when it costs him something." "He sounds like a good man," Caleb said. "He is," Marianne agreed. "He taught me to read before I was 5 years old. He used to say that education was the only thing no one could ever take away from you. That is why I became a teacher. I wanted to give other children what he gave me." "He would be proud of you," Caleb said with certainty. "Going to teach in a place like Las Lunas, giving those kids a chance they might not have had otherwise." "I hope so," Marianne said quietly. "I hope I get the chance to see him again, to tell him how much what he taught me still matters." "You will," Caleb promised. "We will get you there in time." They were quiet for a while, listening to the pop and crackle of the fire, the distant yip of coyotes. Marianne was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how their shoulders were almost touching, how she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Caleb," she said softly, "what you said yesterday about me being something you were looking for without knowing it, did you mean that?" He turned to look at her, the firelight casting shadows across his face, making him look both younger and older at the same time. "Every word," he said. "I know it does not make sense. I know we barely know each other, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." "I feel it too," Marianne whispered, the admission feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I do not understand it, but I feel it. Like something fundamental shifted when you pulled me onto your horse. Like I was waiting for you without knowing I was waiting." Caleb's hand came up to cup her face, his palm warm against her cold cheek. "I am not an easy man," he warned her. "I have spent most of my adult life drifting, never putting down roots, never letting anyone get too close. I have a temper and I am set in my ways and I am probably going to disappoint you. And I am stubborn and opinionated, and I will probably drive you to distraction with my books and my ideas about education and social justice," Marianne countered. "What is your point?" A slow smile spread across Caleb's face, transforming his normally serious expression into something that made Marianne's heart skip. "My point," he said, "is that I am going to kiss you now, and I need you to know what you are getting into." "I know exactly what I am getting into," Marianne said, her voice steadier than she felt. "So stop talking and kiss me." He did. His lips were warm despite the cold night air, gentle but insistent, and Marianne felt something inside her catch fire. She had been kissed before. Awkward fumbling attempts by boys in Kansas City, who thought they were entitled to her affection. But this was nothing like those experiences. This was Caleb's hand sliding into her hair, his other arm pulling her closer, his mouth moving against hers with a hunger that she felt echoed in her own body. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "You are my purpose now," he said fiercely. "Not my burden, not my problem. My purpose. Do you understand what I am saying?" Marianne nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. She understood. She understood that this rough, weathered cowboy was offering her something she had never had before. Someone who saw protecting her, caring for her, being with her not as an obligation or a duty but as a privilege, as something that gave his life meaning. "I understand," she whispered. "And you are mine too." They sat wrapped in each other's arms until the fire burned low, and then Caleb insisted she take the bedroll while he kept watch. Marianne wanted to argue, but she was exhausted from the long day's ride. She fell asleep quickly, lulled by the sound of Caleb moving around the camp, tending the fire, checking on the horses. She woke once in the deep night to find him sitting with his back against a rock, his rifle across his lap, his eyes on the darkness beyond their camp. Watching, always watching. Keeping her safe. "Sleep," he said softly when he saw her stir. "I have got you." And she did, more deeply and peacefully than she had in years. They reached Santa Fe late the following afternoon, riding into the territorial capital as the sun was beginning to set behind the mountains. The city was larger and more established than Las Lunas, with adobe buildings and narrow streets and a cosmopolitan mix of people. Mexican, Anglo, Indian, all going about their business in the fading light. Caleb had asked for the address of Marianne's father's boarding house before they left Las Lunas, and he navigated the unfamiliar streets with the same quiet confidence he seemed to bring to everything. When they arrived at the modest two-story building on the east side of town, Marianne's hands were shaking as she dismounted. "You want me to come in with you?" Caleb asked, his hand steady on her elbow. "Yes," Marianne said immediately. "Please, I need you with me." The landlady, a plump woman with suspicious eyes, directed them to a room on the second floor. Marianne knocked softly, and a male voice called for them to enter. Her father was in bed, propped up on pillows, and Marianne's heart clenched at how frail he looked. Charles Garrison had always been a big man, robust and vital, but illness had wasted him, leaving his skin ashen and his frame gaunt. His eyes, though, were still sharp and alert, and they fixed on Marianne with unmistakable love and relief. "Marianne," he said, his voice weak but warm. "My dear girl, you came." "Of course I came," Marianne said, rushing to his bedside and taking his hand. "Did you think I would not?" "The telegram said blizzard conditions," her father said. "I was afraid you would be trapped in Las Lunas." His eyes shifted to Caleb, who had remained respectfully near the door. "And who is this young man?" "This is Caleb Thorne," Marianne said. "He saved my life, father. I was caught in the blizzard on my way here, and he found me and got me to shelter. Then he escorted me here to make sure I arrived safely." Charles's assessing gaze lingered on Caleb for a long moment, taking in his worn cowboy clothes, his weathered face, the easy way he carried himself. "Come here, Mr. Thorne," he said finally. "Let me get a proper look at the man who saved my daughter's life." Caleb approached the bed and stood where Charles could see him clearly. "Sir," he said respectfully, "it is an honor to meet you. Your daughter speaks very highly of you." "Does she now?" Charles said, a faint smile touching his lips. "And what else does my daughter say about me?" "That you are the best man she knows," Caleb said without hesitation. "That you taught her to value education and justice and doing the right thing even when it costs you. That you are stubborn and terrible at taking care of yourself." This last part earned a surprised laugh from Charles and a mortified gasp from Marianne. "Well, she is not wrong," Charles admitted, his eyes twinkling with amusement despite his obvious exhaustion. "Mr. Thorne, I owe you a debt I can never repay. My daughter is everything to me. Knowing that she is safe because of your actions means more than I can express." "No debt is owed, sir," Caleb said firmly. "Taking care of your daughter has been the furthest thing from a burden. It has been a privilege." Something knowing flickered across Charles's face as he looked between the two of them, noting the way they stood close together, the way Marianne's hand had found Caleb's without conscious thought, the way Caleb's entire body was angled protectively toward her even here in the safety of her father's room. "I see," Charles said softly. "Marianne, my dear, would you mind stepping out for a moment? I would like to speak with Mr. Thorne privately." Marianne's eyes widened with alarm. "Father, I do not think it is all right," Caleb said quietly, squeezing her hand. "Go on, I will be fine." Reluctantly, Marianne released his hand and left the room, closing the door behind her. Caleb stood straighter, preparing himself for whatever examination this clearly formidable man was about to conduct. "Sit down, Mr. Thorne," Charles said, gesturing to the chair beside the bed. "I am too tired to crane my neck looking up at you." Caleb sat, meeting Charles's gaze steadily. "If you are about to ask me my intentions toward your daughter, sir, I will tell you honestly that they are entirely honorable, but also that we have known each other less than 3 days. So I imagine you will find my feelings premature at best and insane at worst." Charles let out a surprised bark of laughter that turned into a coughing fit. When he recovered, there were tears in his eyes, though whether from coughing or mirth, Caleb could not tell. "I like you," Charles said bluntly. "You are honest, which is more than I can say for most men. So let me be equally honest with you. I am dying, Mr. Thorne. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but soon. My heart is giving out, and there is nothing the doctors can do about it. My daughter does not know how bad it really is because I have been shielding her from the truth, but I need her to be taken care of when I am gone." "She does not need taking care of," Caleb said carefully. "She is one of the strongest, most capable women I have ever met." "I know that," Charles said. "But strong, capable women still need someone to stand beside them, someone who sees their strength as something to admire rather than threaten, someone who will not try to diminish them to feel bigger himself." He paused, studying Caleb with those sharp eyes. "Are you that kind of man, Mr. Thorne?" "I am trying to be," Caleb said honestly. "I was not always. I spent a lot of years being angry at the world, taking what I wanted, not thinking much beyond the next job or the next town. But your daughter makes me want to be better than I was. She makes me want to be the kind of man who deserves her." "You saved her life," Charles pointed out. "That suggests you are already pretty far down that road." "Anyone would have done the same," Caleb protested. "No," Charles said firmly, "they would not have. Most men would have looked at a woman alone in a blizzard and calculated whether the risk to themselves was worth the effort. You did not calculate. You just acted. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." He paused, his breathing labored. "I am going to ask you for something, and you have every right to refuse. But I am asking anyway because I am a dying man and dying men get to be selfish." "What do you need?" Caleb asked. "Take care of her," Charles said simply. "Not because she needs it, but because everyone deserves someone who chooses them. Someone who sees them as a gift rather than a burden. My daughter has been lonely for so long, trying to be strong for everyone else, never letting anyone see how much she hurts. She deserves someone who will let her be human, who will catch her when she falls and celebrate when she soars. Can you be that for her?" Caleb felt something tighten in his chest, a weight of responsibility that felt less like a burden and more like a calling. "Yes," he said. "I can. I will." "You have my word." Charles nodded, seeming satisfied. "Good. Now send my daughter back in here before she wears a hole in the floor pacing." When Marianne came back into the room, her eyes immediately went to Caleb, searching his face for any sign of distress. He gave her a small smile and stood, offering her the chair. "I will give you time alone with your father," he said. "I am going to see about finding us rooms for the night. Mr. Thorne," Charles called as Caleb reached the door, "thank you for everything." Caleb nodded and left, and Marianne turned to her father with questioning eyes. "What did you say to him?" she demanded. "Just had a conversation between men," Charles said innocently. "Nothing for you to worry about." "Father," Marianne said warningly. "He is a good man, Marianne," Charles said seriously. "Better than you know. Do not let him get away." "We have only just met," Marianne protested weakly. "Some things you just know," her father said. Your mother and I knew after one conversation. Time does not always matter as much as people think it does. What matters is whether you are willing to take the risk. Over the next 3 days, Marianne split her time between caring for her father and spending every possible moment with Caleb. He had taken a room at the same boarding house and made himself useful, running errands for the landlady, repairing things around the building that needed fixing, always finding reasons to be nearby in case Marianne needed him. Her father's condition improved slowly but steadily, and the doctor expressed cautious optimism about his recovery. With each day that passed, Marianne felt the crushing weight of potential loss ease slightly, replaced by a different kind of fear. What would happen when it was time for her to return to Las Lunas and for Caleb to return to his job at the ranch? On the 4th evening, Caleb asked her to take a walk with him. They strolled through Santa Fe's plaza as the sun set, painting the adobe buildings in shades of gold and pink. The evening was cold but clear, and Marianne pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Your father is getting better," Caleb observed. "That is good news." "Yes," Marianne agreed. "The doctor says he should be able to travel back to Kansas City in a few weeks. He has family there who can help care for him while he continues to recover." "And you?" Caleb asked. "Will you go with him?" Marianne had been dreading this question because she did not know the answer. Part of her felt obligated to accompany her father, to care for him herself. But another part of her, a growing part, did not want to leave New Mexico. Did not want to leave the life she had been building in Las Lunas. Did not want to leave Caleb. "I do not know," she admitted. "He is my father, my responsibility." "He is your father," Caleb agreed, "but he is not your responsibility in the way you think. He is a grown man with his own life to live. You cannot sacrifice your whole future to be his caretaker." "He did it for me," Marianne said quietly. "When my mother died, he put his career on hold to make sure my brother and I were taken care of. He gave up so much for us." "And now he would want you to live your own life," Caleb said firmly. "Do you think he wants you to give up everything you have built here, your teaching position, your independence?" "I do not know what I want," Marianne confessed, feeling tears prick her eyes. "Everything is happening so fast. A week ago, my life made sense. I knew what I was doing and where I was going. Now everything is different and I do not know which way is up." Caleb stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "Do you want to know what I think?" he asked gently. "Yes," Marianne whispered. "I think you are scared," Caleb said. "I think what is happening between us terrifies you because it is real and powerful and you cannot control it. I think you are looking for excuses to run because running feels safer than staying and risking getting hurt. And I think if you get on a train to Kansas City, you will regret it for the rest of your life." "That is not fair," Marianne said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe not," Caleb acknowledged, "but it is true. Marianne, I am not asking you to make any decisions right now. I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow or give up your whole life for me. I am just asking you not to leave. Stay in Las Lunas. Keep teaching. Give us a chance to see where this goes. Your father has people in Kansas City who can help him. You do not have to be the one to sacrifice everything." "What if this does not last?" Marianne asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if in a few months or a year you realize I am not what you wanted? What if I upend my entire life for something that turns out to be temporary?" "What if it is not temporary?" Caleb countered. "What if this is the start of something that lasts the rest of our lives? Are you really willing to throw that away because you are afraid?" "I do not know how to do this," Marianne admitted, tears spilling over now. "I do not know how to trust this. Everything I have ever loved has been taken from me. My mother, my brother, and one day my father. I do not know how to let myself love you when I know how much it will destroy me if I lose you too." Caleb pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried against his chest. "You are right," he said into her hair. "Everything you love will eventually be taken from you. That is the nature of life. We are all temporary. But that does not mean we should not love while we can. That does not mean we should not grab hold of happiness when it is offered. Your mother and brother are gone, but you had them for as long as you did. Was it not worth it? Would you trade away the years you had with them just to avoid the pain of losing them?" "No," Marianne whispered. "Never." "Then give us the same chance," Caleb pleaded. "I cannot promise you forever because no one can promise that. But I can promise you that for as long as I draw breath, I will choose you. Every single day I will wake up and choose you. That is all any of us can do." Marianne pulled back enough to look up at him, seeing the sincerity in his blue eyes, the raw honesty in his expression. He was not making her pretty promises or telling her everything would be perfect. He was offering her something much more valuable, the truth. The messy, complicated, beautiful truth that love was always a risk, but it was a risk worth taking. "I am terrified," she told him. "I know," Caleb said. "So am I, but I would rather be terrified with you than safe and alone." Marianne reached up and pulled his face down to hers, kissing him with all the fear and hope and desperate longing that was churning inside her. He responded with equal intensity, his arms tightening around her, and for a moment nothing else existed except the two of them and the promise of what they could be together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marianne said, "I will stay. In Las Lunas. I will stay and we will see what happens." The smile that broke across Caleb's face was worth every moment of uncertainty. "You will not regret it," he promised. "I already regret it a little," Marianne said, but she was smiling too. "But I would regret leaving more." They talked to her father the next day, and Charles was not surprised by their news. "I knew the moment I saw you two together," he said, looking between them with satisfaction. "You have my blessing, for whatever that is worth." "It is worth everything," Marianne said, squeezing his hand. "But father, I need to know that you will be all right in Kansas City without me. I need to know that you are not going to try to hide how sick you are and end up dying alone because you did not want to burden anyone. Your cousin Margaret has already written saying she has a room prepared for me," Charles assured her. "She is a nurse, as you know, and she has been wanting to help for months. I have just been too stubborn to accept. But I think it is time I learned that accepting help is not weakness. It is wisdom." He glanced meaningfully at Caleb as he said this, and Caleb had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. They stayed in Santa Fe for another week, until Charles was strong enough to make the journey east and Marianne felt confident he would recover. The day they said goodbye at the train station was bittersweet, but there were no tears. Charles embraced his daughter tightly and whispered something in her ear that made her laugh. Then he shook Caleb's hand and said something that made the cowboy's eyes go suspiciously bright. As the train pulled away, Marianne leaned against Caleb, letting him support her weight. "What did my father say to you?" she asked. "He said thank you for giving him peace of mind," Caleb replied. "He said he could die happy knowing you would not be alone." "He is not going to die for a long time yet," Marianne said fiercely. "I know," Caleb soothed. "But when the time comes, whenever that is, you will not face it alone. I promise you that." They returned to Las Lunas a few days later, riding side by side into town as the sun set behind them. Marianne knew the gossip had probably been ferocious in their absence, but she found she did not care anymore. Let people talk. She knew the truth of what she and Caleb shared, and that was all that mattered. What surprised her was the reception they received. Aunt Clara met them at the door with a reserved expression, but after studying them both for a long moment, she simply said, "I suppose you will be wanting to marry soon, then. Best to make it proper before the whole town has decided you are living in sin. Aunt Clara. Marianne gasped, torn between mortification and laughter. I am old, not blind, her aunt said tartly. That man looks at you like you hung the moon, and you look at him the same way. Might as well make it official and spare me the indignity of defending your virtue to every busybody in town. Over the following weeks, Marianne and Caleb settled into a courtship that was both traditional and entirely unconventional. He would ride into town after his work at the ranch was done and join her for dinner at her aunt's house. They would take walks through town, always properly chaperoned, but always finding moments to steal touches and whispered conversations. On Sundays, he would sit in the back of the small church and watch her teach the children their Bible lessons, and the look in his eyes made her stumble over her words more than once. True to her word, Aunt Clara began planning a wedding. It would be small and simple, befitting a schoolteacher's modest means, but it would be proper and respectable. The date was set for early April, 2 months after that fateful blizzard that had brought them together. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. In late March, word came that Charles Garrison had taken a turn for the worse. The telegram was brief and urgent. Come if you can. May not have much time. Marianne read the words with shaking hands, the paper crinkling in her grip. Caleb, who had been with her when the telegram arrived, immediately began making arrangements. We will leave first thing tomorrow, he said decisively. I will take time off from the ranch. We will get you to Kansas City. It is a week's journey at least, Marianne said numbly. Maybe more. What if we do not make it in time? Then we do not make it in time, Caleb said gently, taking her hands in his. But we will try. And if the worst happens, at least you will know you did everything you could. They left Las Lunas at dawn the next morning, taking the stage to Santa Fe and then the train east. The journey was long and exhausting, made worse by Marianne's anxiety and grief. Caleb stayed by her side every moment, a steady presence in the chaos of her emotions. He did not try to tell her everything would be fine because they both knew it might not be. He just held her hand and let her cry when she needed to, and distracted her with stories when the silence became too heavy. They arrived in Kansas City on a gray afternoon with rain threatening. Marianne's cousin Margaret met them at the station, her face grave. He has been asking for you, she said without preamble. He is hanging on, but he is very weak. We need to hurry. The house where Charles was staying was a modest Victorian on the east side of the city. Margaret led them upstairs to a bedroom that smelled of medicine and sickness, and Marianne's heart broke at the sight of her father. He looked even more frail than he had in Santa Fe, his skin paper thin, his breathing labored. But when his eyes opened and he saw her, they were still sharp and aware. "Marianne," he whispered, "you came." "Of course I came," Marianne said, rushing to his bedside and taking his hand. "I will always come when you need me." "Good girl," Charles murmured. "Is Caleb here?" "I am here, sir," Caleb said, stepping forward so Charles could see him. "Good," Charles said with satisfaction. "Need to see you married. Cannot die without seeing that." "Father, do not talk like that," Marianne protested, though tears were streaming down her face. "Have to talk like that," Charles said with a faint smile. "It is the truth. Reverend Taylor is downstairs. Margaret sent for him when she got your telegram saying you were coming. Marry him, Marianne. Marry him today. Give an old man that gift." Marianne looked at Caleb, who looked back at her with an expression that was both questioning and determined. "If you want this, I want it too," he said simply. "I do not care about the circumstances or the timing. I just want to be yours." "I want it," Marianne whispered. "I want to marry you. Today. Right now." So they were married in Charles Garrison's bedroom with Margaret and the Reverend, and 2 of Margaret's friends as witnesses. Marianne wore her traveling dress and Caleb wore his best shirt and vest, and they spoke their vows holding hands beside the bed where her father lay dying. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed her gently, reverently, like she was something precious and fragile. Charles watched it all with tears streaming down his face, a look of profound peace settling over his features. "Thank you," he whispered. "Both of you, thank you for letting me see this." He died 3 hours later, slipping away peacefully with Marianne holding one hand and Caleb holding the other. His last words were, "Do not grieve too long. Live. Be happy. That is what I want for you." The funeral was held 2 days later, a small affair attended mostly by Charles's former colleagues and a few distant relatives. Marianne stood at the graveside with Caleb's arm around her waist, and she thought about everything her father had taught her, everything he had given her. He had spent his whole life fighting for justice, teaching her to be strong, and in the end, he had given her one last gift, the freedom to choose her own happiness without guilt. After the funeral, there were practical matters to settle. Charles had left everything he owned to Marianne, which was not much but included some money and his collection of law books. Margaret offered to keep the books until Marianne wanted them shipped to New Mexico, and Marianne accepted gratefully. On their last night in Kansas City, before heading back to New Mexico, Caleb held Marianne in their hotel room as she finally let herself truly grieve. She cried until she had no tears left, mourning not just her father but her mother and brother and the family she would never have again. Caleb did not try to stop her or minimize her pain. He just held her and let her feel everything she needed to feel. "I am glad we got married when we did," Marianne said finally, her voice hoarse from crying. "I am glad he got to see it. I am glad his last memory of me was a happy one." "He loved you very much," Caleb said. "That was clear in every word he ever spoke about you. You were his greatest pride." "He would have liked you," Marianne said with a watery smile. "Not just because you saved me, but because of who you are. He always said character was more important than circumstance, and you have so much character, Caleb, so much honor and decency. I am proud to be your wife." "And I am honored to be your husband," Caleb replied, kissing her forehead. "Now and always." They returned to Las Lunas in late April to find spring had come to the high desert. The scrubland was dotted with wildflowers, and the air had lost its winter bite. Aunt Clara had kept their belongings safe, and their house, prepared. Caleb had purchased a small 2-room house on the edge of town before they left, a place they could call their own. It was modest, just a bedroom and a main room that served as both kitchen and living space, with a small barn out back for Caleb's horse and whatever other animals they might acquire. But it was theirs, and Marianne loved it with a fierceness that surprised her. She returned to her teaching position, and the children welcomed her back with shy enthusiasm and handmade cards expressing their condolences about her father. Caleb continued working at the Double T Ranch but came home every evening without fail, and gradually they built a life together. It was not always easy. They argued about money and household responsibilities, and Caleb's tendency to be overprotective. Marianne sometimes missed the intellectual stimulation of city life, and Caleb sometimes chafed at the constraints of marriage after so many years of independence. But they worked through their disagreements, learning each other's rhythms and needs, and the arguments always ended with apologies and renewed commitment. Their first year of marriage was marked by small joys and mundane challenges. A successful garden that actually produced vegetables despite the harsh soil, a new roof that stopped the winter rains from leaking through, a promotion for Caleb to foreman at the ranch that came with better pay and more responsibility. Marianne's school grew as word spread about her dedication and skill, and parents who had been skeptical of a woman teacher began bringing their daughters as well as their sons. And through it all, their love deepened and matured, becoming less about the intense physical attraction that had first drawn them together and more about the deep friendship and partnership they were building. They learned to anticipate each other's moods, to provide comfort without being asked, to celebrate each other's victories and shoulder each other's burdens. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Marianne discovered she was pregnant. She told Caleb over dinner one evening, simply and without fanfare, and watched his face transform from shock to wonder to a joy so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Marianne asked, suddenly uncertain. They had never explicitly discussed children, and she did not know if he wanted to be a father. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Caleb said, coming around the table and pulling her into his arms. "Marianne, you have given me everything: a home, a purpose, a reason to be better than I was, and now this. I do not have words for what I am feeling right now." "Try," Marianne said, smiling through her tears. "Blessed," Caleb said finally. "I feel blessed beyond measure or deserving." The pregnancy was not easy. Marianne suffered from terrible sickness in the early months and exhaustion throughout. She had to stop teaching in her 7th month when standing for long periods became too difficult, and she fretted constantly about her students and whether her replacement was doing an adequate job. Caleb worried about her constantly, sometimes driving her to distraction with his hovering. But she could not be too annoyed because she knew it came from love, from his bone-deep need to protect the people he cared about. And when she woke in the night uncomfortable and unable to sleep, he was always there, rubbing her back or fetching her water or just talking to her softly until exhaustion pulled her under again. Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1884, arriving 3 weeks early and screaming his displeasure at the world with impressive volume. Caleb, who had paced the main room like a caged animal while the midwife attended Marianne, was allowed in as soon as the baby was cleaned and wrapped. Marianne would never forget the expression on his face when he first held his son. Pure, unfiltered awe, mixed with a terror that made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. "He is so small," Caleb whispered, looking at the tiny bundle in his arms like it might break. "How is anything this small even alive?" "He is perfect," Marianne said firmly, exhausted but exhilarated. "And he is ours." They named him Charles after Marianne's father with the middle name of Thorne. Charlie they called him, and he was indeed perfect despite his early arrival. He had Caleb's blue eyes and Marianne's dark hair, and from the beginning, he had a personality that suggested he would be a force to be reckoned with. Fatherhood transformed Caleb in unexpected ways. The man who had spent his life drifting and avoiding commitment became fiercely devoted to his tiny son. He would come home from long days at the ranch and immediately take Charlie from Marianne, walking him around the house and talking to him in a low, gentle voice about horses and cattle and the changing seasons. He changed diapers without complaint and got up for nighttime feedings even though Marianne was nursing, just to be there, to share the burden. "You are my purpose, not my burden," he told his son one night when he thought Marianne was asleep. She heard him through the thin walls, his voice soft and full of wonder. "Both of you. Everything I do, everything I am, it is for you. Do you understand? You are what makes it all mean something." Marianne pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle her sob, overwhelmed by love for this man who had become so much more than she ever could have imagined that day. He pulled her onto his horse in the blizzard. As Charlie grew from infant to toddler, their little house felt even smaller but infinitely fuller. His laughter filled the rooms, his toys cluttered every surface, His endless energy exhausted them both. Marianne returned to teaching when Charlie was 2, bringing him with her to the schoolhouse where he sat in the corner with his own slate and chalk, imitating the older children. Caleb continued to rise through the ranks at the Double T, and eventually, the ranch owner offered him a partnership, a chance to buy in and own a piece of the operation. It would take every penny they had saved plus a loan from the bank, but it would mean security, a legacy to pass on to Charlie and any future children. They talked about it long into the night, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. In the end, Marianne was the one who pushed Caleb to take the chance. "You are the best rancher I know," she said firmly. "You have transformed that operation in the 5 years you have been foreman. The owner knows it, which is why he is making this offer. This is our chance to build something real, something permanent. We have to take it." So Caleb bought into the Double T, and they became part owners of one of the most successful ranches in central New Mexico. It meant longer hours and more responsibility for Caleb, but it also meant better money and real security for their family. 2 years later, they had a daughter. She arrived on a hot August afternoon, much less dramatically than her brother, with Caleb present for the birth this time. Marianne had insisted, wanting him there, and he had held her hand and wiped her face and told her how strong she was, how proud he was of her. They named her Clara, after Marianne's aunt, who had passed away the previous winter, with the middle name of Margaret after Marianne's cousin. Clara was as different from Charlie as night from day. Quiet where he was loud, thoughtful where he was impulsive, but just as beloved. The years passed in a blur of joy and challenge, and the mundane beauties of everyday life. Charlie grew tall and strong, taking after his father in build and temperament, and by the time he was 10, he was working alongside Caleb at the ranch, learning everything there was to know about cattle and horses. Clara was quieter but just as fierce in her own way, and she had inherited her mother's love of learning. She spent hours with her nose buried in books, and when she was 8, she announced that she wanted to be a teacher just like Mama. Marianne and Caleb grew older together, their faces gaining lines and their bodies showing the wear of hard work and sun and wind. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with each passing year, becoming less about passion and more about the profound comfort of knowing another person completely, of being known in return. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb brought Marianne back to the line shack where he had sheltered her during the blizzard. It was abandoned now, falling into disrepair, but it was still standing. They sat inside as the sun set, remembering. "I thought I was going to die that day," Marianne said softly, "and then you appeared out of nowhere like some kind of miracle." "I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen," Caleb replied, standing there in that blizzard refusing to give up. "I knew right then that I would do anything to save you." "You did save me," Marianne said. "In more ways than you know. I was so lonely before I met you, Caleb. I was going through the motions of living, but I was not really alive. You changed that. You made me want to live fully, to take risks, to be happy." "You did the same for me," Caleb said, pulling her close. "I was drifting before I found you, just existing. You gave me a reason to put down roots. You gave me a home." "We gave each other a home," Marianne corrected, kissing him softly. They sat in the old line shack as darkness fell, wrapped in each other and in memories, and Marianne thought about how strange and wonderful life was. How a single moment, a single decision to leave town in bad weather, could change everything. How a blizzard could bring 2 lonely people together and set them on a path neither could have imagined. As they rode back to their ranch house under a sky full of stars, Caleb said quietly, "I know I have said this before, but I need you to hear it again. You were never my burden, Marianne. Not in that blizzard, not during your father's illness, not during the hard early years when we were figuring out how to be married. You have always been my purpose, the reason I get up in the morning, the reason everything matters. And you are mine, Marianne said, her voice thick with emotion. My purpose, my partner, my love. Then, now, and always. Years continued to pass, bringing new joys and new challenges. Charlie grew into a fine young man and eventually married a rancher's daughter from Santa Fe. They built a house on the Double T land and started their own family, giving Marianne and Caleb their first grandchildren. Clara pursued her education with fierce determination, eventually becoming not just a teacher but the principal of the school in Las Lunas, expanding it and bringing in more resources for the children. The ranch prospered under Caleb's management, and eventually, when the original owner retired, Caleb and Marianne bought him out completely, becoming full owners. It was a responsibility and a burden, but also a source of deep pride. They had built something real and lasting, something they could pass on to their children and grandchildren. On a warm spring evening in 1902, 20 years after that fateful blizzard, Marianne and Caleb sat on the porch of their ranch house watching the sunset. They were in their 50s now, their hair threaded with silver, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard work. But their hands were intertwined, their bodies leaning into each other with the ease of long familiarity. "You ever regret it?" Caleb asked suddenly. "Staying here, marrying me, giving up the life you might have had in a city somewhere?" Marianne turned to look at him, seeing the man she had fallen in love with in a blizzard still visible beneath the years and the wear. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for one single moment. This life we have built, this family, this home, it is everything I never knew I wanted. You are everything I never knew I needed." "I love you," Caleb said simply. "I have loved you from the moment I pulled you onto my horse and you trusted me to keep you safe. I will love you until the day I die and beyond if such things are possible." "I love you too," Marianne replied, tears gathering in her eyes. "More than words can say. You gave me everything, Caleb, everything that matters." As the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, they sat in comfortable silence. Two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life that exceeded anything either could have imagined. The blizzard that had brought them together was long past, faded into memory and legend. But what they had created in the aftermath of that storm, what they continued to create every day, was very real and very precious. They had started as strangers thrown together by circumstance, one desperately in need and one compelled to help. But they had become partners, lovers, best friends, parents, and grandparents. They had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, faced losses and celebrated victories, and through it all, they had chosen each other. Caleb had been right that first morning in the line shack when he told Marianne she was his purpose, not his burden. And Marianne had been right when she told him he was hers. They had saved each other, not just from a blizzard but from loneliness and purposelessness, and the kind of half-life that comes from being too afraid to take risks. Years later, when Charlie's son asked Caleb to tell him the story of how he met Grandma, Caleb would always start the same way. It was the kind of day that should have ended in tragedy. A blizzard came out of nowhere and your grandma was caught in it, alone and scared. "I found her by pure chance, or maybe it was fate. I have never been sure which. But I knew from the moment I saw her that my life was about to change." And when the grandchildren would ask if he minded that his life changed, if he ever wished things had stayed simple, Caleb would smile and say, "The best thing that ever happened to me was that blizzard making your grandma my problem. Because she was never really a problem at all. She was my purpose, my reason, my everything. And that has made all the difference. Marianne lived to see her great-grandchildren, to witness the ranch expand and prosper, to watch Clara become one of the most respected educators in New Mexico. Caleb stayed by her side through all of it, as devoted at 70 as he had been at 27. When Marianne finally passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72, Caleb mourned her deeply, but without regret. They had been given 43 years together, 43 years of love and partnership and purpose. Caleb followed her 3 years later, dying quietly in the house they had built together, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. His last words were reported to be, "Tell Marianne I am coming. Tell her I kept my promise. I chose her every single day." The story of the blizzard and the cowboy and the schoolteacher became part of family legend, passed down through generations. The line shack where they had sheltered eventually collapsed into ruin, but the ranch house they built stood strong, home to Thornes for generations to come. And always, when someone asked about the foundation of the family, about where it all started, the answer was the same. It started with a blizzard that made a woman a cowboy's problem. But he only said, "You are my purpose, not my burden now." And from that single moment of choosing connection over convenience, of choosing love over safety, came everything else. A family, a legacy, a love story that would endure long after both of them were gone. Because in the end, that was the truth they had discovered together in that cold line shack 20 years before. People were never burdens when you chose to love them. They were purposes, reasons, the things that made life worth living. And Caleb and Marianne had chosen each other, fully and completely, every single day of their lives together. That choice, made and remade constantly through decades of joy and sorrow and mundane, everyday existence, was what built something that lasted. Not the dramatic rescue in the blizzard, though that was where it started. Not the intensity of new love, though that had been real and powerful. But the daily choice, the constant recommitment, the decision to see each other not as problems to be managed, but as purposes to be cherished. That was the real story. That was the real miracle. Two lonely people finding each other in a storm and deciding they were worth the risk, worth the effort, worth everything. And from that decision came a life, a family, a love that transcended time and circumstance and became something eternal. The end.